Top of the morning, everyone. My name is Tshidi and I'm back with another video. Today's video is very different. We're talking about different interview styles. Today's video is focusing on the STAR interview style, or what some people call behavioral interview style. There's so many interview types that different companies use. We do have what they call the traditional interview style. Now, this is where they normally just have a conversation with you for an hour, half an hour, where the focus is more about you and what you're all about, what you bring to the table, some of the things that you've learned. That's the traditional type of interview. The second type of interview that is sometimes very tricky is actually the panel interview, because that's when for a lot of people they're trying to read that panel to understand what do they think. Because I think one of the biggest things, or one of the most difficult things, is where everybody says to you, oh, look at the panel, try and understand what they're trying to say. And in a panel interview, you'll be in a room with several people, usually 3 to 5 people, but it's also as many as 10. Some companies have done as many as 10 people in a room, and those are sometimes stakeholders, people that you deal with on a daily basis. And sometimes each person will ask a series of questions. They've got specific things that they're trying to get out of you, will have follow-up questions. So sometimes people actually arrange themselves in such a way that there's conversations about, okay, you're going to answer this, you're going to ask this question, then I'll do a follow-up after that. Now, there's also what they call serial interviews. Now, serial interviews are very different. This type of interview, a series of interviews on the same day. So this is one of those where it's sometimes a bit hectic, but it's sometimes also very good, because you can actually take time off for the one day and just literally just go sit for those interviews. And once they're all completed and everybody's happy with your performance in the interview, they will then make a decision. If they don't make a decision, then for a company like that, I'd say just run as far as you can. The other one that we've got is a bit more relaxed, which is the lunch interview, or the breakfast interview, or the coffee interview. Now, these are normally scheduled for senior execs, because in some cases they're looking at not trying to come into the office because people know them, and it could actually cause a bit of noise in the industry. So these where we take candidates, or you'll take a candidate to lunch or to some breakfast. And what they're then looking for in this particular one is your business etiquette, communication and interpersonal skills, how you socialize in an environment like that, social skills and your table manners. And what I always say to people in this one is, it doesn't matter how nice the environment is. It doesn't matter whether it's, for example, an assessment center or an environment where you can actually let your hair down. Please never ever let your guard down, just because in 99% of the time, they're actually watching everything that you're actually doing at that time. The last kind of interview that I'm going to actually focus on is actually the behavioral job interview. This behavioral job interviews are designed to provide interviewer with information about how you think you behave in certain situations. And that's why it's called the behavioral. It's how does your natural state behave in certain situations. Hiring managers are interested in the method of your thinking, how you're going about doing different tasks, as well as how you respond in difficult situations. An effective way to answer behavioral questions is to provide the interviewer with 4 pieces of information known as the STAR method. The STAR method speaks about situation, task, as well as action. Using the strategy, it's very, very particularly helpful to make sure that you respond in such a way that it's focused on the competencies, focused on the interviews, which are typically start out as phrases. And some of the phrases that you'll get out of these things, or some of the questions that you'll normally get when it comes to these, is describe a time when. Every time somebody says describe a time when this happens, or give us an example of a situation when this happened, it's very, very important that you understand that in that particular instance, because it's a behavioral question, you try by all means to actually give them the STAR method. Now, one of the questions that somebody will then ask is to say, okay, it's very tricky to have something like that and to prepare for something like that. How should one prepare for an interview using a STAR method? Since you won't know in advance what the interviewer or the interviewing technique that your interviewer will be using is, you'll benefit from always making sure that you're always prepared. You need to come up with different examples of, if they were to ask you something about this, how would you then answer it using the STAR methodology? And the easiest way that you'll be able to do that is, first of all, you make a list of some of the requirements or the skills that you currently have. And once you've actually made a list of those skills that you required for that job, it may also help you to then take just a few minutes to look at the job listing, the similar job listings, look at other companies, compare what those job companies are, and what are the preferred skills, the qualities that actually match that particular job. Because once you know that, it then becomes very, very easy for you to create a list of examples to be able to say, if they're looking for a recruiter, these are the type of questions that they'll normally ask. Then consider specific examples where you've actually had to go through those scenarios where you had a situation, you had a task, you had an action, as well as a result. What were those? Because once you've been able to do that, then it actually makes things a lot easier for you to then deal with a question like that. The other thing that we need to also then remember is that with every single thing that you're answering in that particular interview is you need to try and match your skills to the job. Never ever forget that it doesn't matter what question that people are asking, it's always about matching the skills to that particular job. You can also take a look at some of the common behavioral interview questions that normally come. You can even Google them. You can literally type behavioral job interview questions and Google how some of the people actually answer that. Now, the response method is actually based on either sometimes a very horrible assumption or sometimes a very good assumption. The assumption is past performance can be a good indicator of future performance. Interviewers ask behavioral questions because they're hoping that if you're able to handle something like this, you'll be able to handle the next thing that looks exactly like that. So that's why people normally go for these behavioral job interviews, because they're hoping that if you excelled in some of the tasks or some of the issues that they will have, that you're going to excel in the future issues that the company is going to throw at you. Star key concept is very, very important that you also focus on a few other elements when you're actually answering the star type of interview, or what they would call the behavioral interview. The situation, you need to then sit down and think, okay, how do I describe what happened at that particular time? What was the ask? What were you asked to do? Describe the context within which you performed a specific job or faced a challenge at work. That's what they would normally ask you to say. You need to describe this. So what was the situation? You need to describe what that situation is. Once you've been able to describe what the situation is, what you were asked to do, the next thing that you need to do is to actually focus on describing your responsibilities in that situation, because then that is the task. And once you've actually spoken about the responsibilities for that particular role, then the next thing that you need to jump into this action. You then describe how you completed the task or endeavored to meet the challenge. Focus on what you did rather than what your team or your boss or your co-workers did. Instead of saying words like, we did this, we did that, you can just say, I focused on this, or my area was this, or my area of responsibility was XYZ. And then once you've also done that, then you jump into the next one, which is explain the outcome. What happened? Whether it's a failure or it's a success, you need to always make sure that you actually explain exactly what the results were. It may also be very, very helpful to emphasize what you accomplished or what you learned from that particular task. Because so you describe the situation. After you describe the situation, you've been able to tell people what the situation was. The next thing that you then focused on was to actually speak about the task. What task did you perform? What did you have to do? XYZ, starting from B to A to this. And then what actions were you focusing on? And then finally, what were the results of that? And always remember, with every single job that you do, it is always best that when you focus on these things, you always give examples. You always make sure that you always link some of the tasks or everything that you're doing to the current job that you're focusing on, as well as your lessons. If you can never show the lessons, whether the task actually failed, then the business will always feel that you'll never learn. Top of the morning once again, and until we meet again in the next video, peace.